Hello and welcome to the No Coach podcast. This is episode 309. Why is it so hard to say no in labour? I'm Suzanne Kohlberg, welcoming back Angie Evans, who is a birth doula. If you don't know what a doula is, we did go into it a lot more in our previous episode, but just summary, a person to support you and advocate and work with you during the birthing process. So Angie, why is it so hard to say no in labour?
Well, the last episode we covered just sort of that people need to know and they need to plan. And when I was a new doula, what I would see, and I taught prenatal class, like taught prenatal classes for years, and I would have people really well prepared. And then we'd go into the hospital and they would just be like, okay, something's recommended. They're like, okay, fine. And I'm like, who is this person? Like, so I had this little joke. I would say, okay, y'all, like, as soon as you go through those sliding doors at the hospital, the voice fairies come and steal your voice. And because that was really the only explanation I could come up with at the time. And I lived in a land where like the women were feisty and strong and they knew what they wanted and they prepared so well. And so it was puzzling. And then some years later, I learned about the hormone and stress response. Like there are hormones that govern how birth goes, but this whole stress response was like, bang, light bulbs went on for me. So we all know, or most of us know, about the fight, flight, or freeze stress response. And that has its place. And I always ask people to think back to like caveman days. So the people who are young and healthy, and research shows there are probably women hunting too, which I find very cool. But the young, strong, healthy people would be out hunting and their survival depended on either outrunning some scary thing or being able to fight. And so that's what we think of as a normal stress response. But what would the people back at the cave do? Like the pregnant women, the mothers, the grandmothers, the sick people, the elderly people, the babies, all of them. They're not going to fight. They're not going to run. You're not going to run away and leave the elderly people and babies to fend for themselves. So they're very survival. There's a stress response deeper, and it's more in women, and it's called Tend and Befriend. And it totally made sense when I learned this. It was like click, because if there was, crazy stuff going on at the cave, the home fires, they had to look after each other. Their survival depended on banding together and taking good care of each other. And the way this translates in the birth room, which I see all the time, is that like acquiescent, let's create a harmonious environment and make friends and be obedient, and let's not rock the boat. And so people, no matter how prepared they are, then they go into this tend and befriend mode. And that goes like almost against our nature to say, no, thank you for all that information, but I'm still going to do what I want.
Is that the same as fawn? Because I've heard of, fight, fright, freeze, and fawn. Because fawn is kind of the acquiescing, people pleasing, like whatever you want to do kind of thing, which makes me think of your tend and befriend, but I've never heard it described that way before. But when you think about it, so if the people who have the fight response are the hunters and the people out doing the action, if you're in a group, if you're in a society, especially as you said, caveman days, if you like disruptive, you may get excommunicated, exiled, asked to leave, and then you're left on your own. So if you tend to befriend or fawn, then you just kind of like toe the line so that you don't get left out of the crowd.
Mm-hmm. And fawn is even a bit of a almost more like a trauma response.
Mm-hmm.
So fawn, like if you think of how would a little fawn be in the woods if its mother left it or had to step away, how it would, and I've seen this happen, and it can be a little scary to see it where someone almost can't even speak. It's almost like a freeze and they go into a little ball, and that's even like I don't know if I would call it a deeper stress response or just a different, but it often goes with people who have past trauma where they actually can't even speak at all, let alone like they're not even trying to make friends with other people in the room. They're just like really isolated.
And I'm curious, from your observations, is that more likely in a hospital or an institute, so like that response place, as opposed to like a home birth, or I don't know if you have them there, I imagine you do, but like a midwife center, or it's a less it's still not in the home, but it's a less clinical kind of place to deliver, and they have like midwife centers and things here.
Often, yes, I'll say yes. And it's not that people who work in hospitals do anything wrong. It's not that at all. It's just that most of us aren't used to going to, well, I mean, we're used to it, but when you think about it, having to go to a new place, like just relocating in labor, adds a little layer of stress for many people. A lot of people just have not had pleasant experiences in hospital, because that's why we go to the hospital. So
for
they're going
recovery
now
or emergency.
yeah, right. So they're going for a thing that's quite a celebration. They're meeting new people in labor. They're being watched. They're being observed. They're having all kinds of questions to answer. We give staff 5 minutes to get to know someone. Like that's a big ask for them. And so it is more likely to happen in that situation, just because of the nature of not being in our own space. Like animals who are in labor and experience stress, which you could say moving birthplaces, meeting new people, feeling naked in front of other people you've never met, that is stressful for a lot of people. If an animal is in labor and stressed, their labor will completely stop while they go find a safe place to resume labor. And that happens at any stage. And we think, oh, well, we're all evolved. No, we're still mammals. And of course, in the medical model, the way to remedy that isn't to say, how can we offer more support and help this person feel more secure? Because it's not designed that way. The medical model's response is, let's use medication to speed up labor, and let's use medication to make it less painful. And that has its place, but for that reason, like it's just a different way. Whereas if someone was at their home and they were stressed out, we might say, well, let's dim the lights and play some nice music and leave them alone to, hang out in the birth tub for a while. And we're just going to go have a cup of tea over here. So it's just such a different environment.
You raised so many great points there. First of all, I loved how you said animals in nature, not just animals, humans. I've had two friends who have been in labor. Like one was like, I want to leave going to the hospital as late as possible. So she was out walking because, we're told it's really great in the early stages of labor and all this sort of thing. And a snake came out and she freaked out, which is, understandable. And her labor stopped like that. She went from, I think I'm going to have to go to the hospital soon, to nothing. And I had another friend who, unfortunately, they waited to the stage where it's like, it's time to go to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, they had a fender bender. Everybody was okay. It wasn't a bad accident, but her husband got into an accident. Her labor stopped instantly. And so when they got to the hospital, tried to speed it up, as you said, and this might have happened anyway, I'm not, proclaiming, but ended up with a cesarean because, but all these things to say, when you are in an environment where you, and more likely your home, but even these birth centers or some hospitals do attempt to like dim the lights, or like the place I was supposed to have Xanthi, they showed where the docking station was and how you could have the music and things that feel familiar and comforting and reassuring to you, so that your nervous system doesn't respond like that. Like very recently, this has nothing to do with labor, but I burnt myself quite badly. And a lot of people said, why didn't you go to the hospital? And had it been bad enough, I 100% would have, but all that to say, I didn't want to sit in the emergency room for up to 16 hours with all the germs and all the exposure and all the people and different people coming on and off shift and whatever. I know how to manage a burn. And had it got bad enough, I 100% would have. But I think sometimes we are quick to go to the experts. And as I said, not saying to downplay people's expertise, but if that stresses you out more and you have capabilities or people that you can support you, like a doula or a midwife or, a team, there's skills that we've had that sometimes we downplay to speed things up or make it less painful, as you said. But I loved how you described it. Let's dim the lights. Let's go have a cup of tea. So you're not having people poking and prodding, especially, hi, I'm such and such, and I'm about to stick my hand up inside you, and we met 3 seconds ago. I still remember that with Xanthi. It's like, how many times does somebody's hand have to go inside me? Like, to this day, I don't understand. And now I understand a lot of it wasn't necessary, and I didn't have to consent to it. But it was just kind of like, I didn't know that I could say no or how to say no. So all of this to say, I love all these points that you raise. It's so hard to say no because hormone response, stress response, you don't know that you can. And how calming it is, or things that are calming to you. Because once again, I think I can imagine, how many births roughly do you think you've attended, Angie?
Coming up to 400, like probably around 380.
And what are the music choices? Like, I imagine some people would be like, I listen to Usher. Well, I think it's Usher. Turn all the lights out. That's what I like. It calms me down. Beat pop music. If you put on
Everything.
classical, I'd be like, get out. I don't want to hear that. But every person is different.
Yeah, everything. I actually encourage people to make a few different playlists because they might feel like I had to once listen to like country music for like 16 hours straight. And I work with a lot of people who like gospel music or spiritual music. And most people want sort of a quiet vibe, but a lot of people, I love the playlists. My clients make amazing playlists. I was with this is my favorite music at a birth story. I was with someone and she had like this new agey thing and this beautiful playlist. And then right as the baby was being born, her husband's workout list came on, like her playlist ended and her baby was born to Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle.
Oh my goodness, that's a story. But
she was so mad.
I love how you recommend, because I did have different playlists and I went with the upbeat. I remember Turn All the Lights Out. I remember Pompeii, like how am I going to be an optimist about this? And I remember laughing because everything was going downhill. But in the end, when I ended up going into theater, because I didn't have a control then, we weren't allowed to where I was, she ended up being born. Like they lifted her out to My Heart Will Go On from Titanic, which I don't know how that ended up being there. But now that's like her favorite movie. So I swear maybe it was like imprinted on her at birth or something. But I digress. Like, what is calming to you? What is familiar to you? What is comforting to you? Some people might love the pool. Some people might be like, no way, no, am I getting in that? And everybody is different. And sometimes you won't know until you're in the situation.
Yeah. And that's why when people have a doula in the birth room, why their labors are shorter and less complicated, because they have someone who can help them. Like we plan all that ahead of time, of course, but also helping them in the moment, being a buffer with the new people, because the people are awesome. Like there are amazing people working at the hospital, but you're still meeting new people in labor, and just having that buffer or that cocoon, having someone who can attend to the music, or hey, oh, this is happening now, let's try that other thing, or let's dim the lights, or there are so many different things we do at births. And there's an obstetrician in the States, he's passed now, but Marsden Wagner, one of the quotes I loved of his, he said, if doulas were a drug, it would be unethical not to use them, just because the outcomes are so much better.
But also too, another thing we haven't even touched on, we're almost at time, but just something to consider. I don't know what it's like there, but I imagine many hospitals are similar. When I was having both of my children, the people looking after me were also looking after others. There was other birthing suites next door and next door and next door. So they could not be with me the entire time. And I don't expect them to. But when you have the doula or the birth support person that you've hired to be with you, who you're familiar with, who know your likes and dislikes, wants and not wants and whatever, but can be with you the whole time. Like I remember there was a moment with Xanthi where all the midwives had to rush out because they had a preemie baby happening next door and they needed all hands on deck. And I was literally on my own because Jeremy had to go and wander out for I can't remember what reason. And I was just like panicking because I was alone and I didn't know what was happening and wasn't in an unfamiliar place. So when you have that person who is your person, who knows you, I think there's something, really, really powerful about that, to be considered. And the last thing before we wrap up, I had another question. I asked music. What was it? Oh, I can't even remember now. I'll have to message you later because I was like, it was a good one. But I just wanted to normalize that everybody has a different experience and there isn't a right or wrong. And yeah, having that person. Oh, do you do visualizations with your clients? Because the thing that my doula did, because Xanthi's birth was quite traumatic and I didn't sleep in the latter half of pregnancy with Casimir. It was a whole story. But I remember her, I don't know if she just made it up on the spot or whatever, but she just took me through this visualization of basically sloughing off Xanthi's birth and letting Casimir's be a different experience. And to this day, I still remember that. Like, she's like, imagine you're wearing like a big heavy gown, like before you go into surgery, you don't have to wear that drape, you know, and you're just taking that off and letting that like burn and stepping into a new. And as I said, like, to have that experience to be able to either come up with something in the moment or to, you know, be with that person. And I've also had wonderful experiences with medical staff as well. The obstetrician I had for Casimir in the last appointment when I was losing it, because I was so panicked after Xanthi's bad experience. I remember he stayed with me. And I knew my appointment had gone long. And he's like, no, we'll take as long as it takes until you're ready for this. And I remember walking out into the waiting room and all these pregnant women at different levels of pregnancy, like crowding, the waiting room's overflowing because my appointment's gone so long. And he's like, no, this is what you needed. And I never felt more heard or supported in my life.
That's lovely. That's the level of support I wish everybody could have.
Yeah, I love it. So, Angie, what do you do? Well, obviously we've covered that, but you know, in your words, what do you do and where can people find you if they want to know more?
My work really is centered on helping make birth more empowering and better for people. And so my website, angieevans.ca, that's ANGIEEVANS, so 2 E's in the middle, .ca, angieevans.ca. I have classes. I have an awesome class, How to Ease Labor Pain, that teaches partners how to do birth support. Could also call it doula for a day, probably prenatal classes.
I like that. Make that a thing, doula for a day.
Yeah, and there are all kinds of articles and videos and things like that for people who just want to go there and go for free and learn a bunch of great things. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you for joining me, Angie. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Catch you on the next one. Bye for now.